And the adorable neighbor children are not great at taking, I have to work now for an answer, because they're simply adorable neighbor children. And then they have like several follow-up questions to the thing they just asked you. And they're very cute. So,
kids have no concept of time.
No,
Like,
not at all.
Probably until they're like close to 10.
Yeah.
They just don't understand it. Like, you'd be like, okay, we're leaving in 5 minutes. And that's like, 10 seconds. You could be like, we're leaving in an hour. And they like, to them, that means like 5 days.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like
they,
the hell.
I think they are 7 and 4, I think is, so they're pretty good at talking. And like you can have interesting conversations with them, and they wanted to come talk to me about how they went to the circus on the weekend. And it's really hard to be like, I have to go work when they're being so cute. So,
Yeah, were they like, oh, Auntie Eleanor, look at my, I don't know, whatever British people play with, whatever British children play with. Peppa Pig. Look at my Peppa Pig.
They're always on scooters. They always have those little scooters.
Oh, geez.
So they're going around on their little scooters, and they show me various things, but they wanted to talk circus, and they wanted to know why I didn't go to the circus, and then they wanted to know where Blair was, and then they wanted to know why we don't have a car. And very, very, very good. Now I've discussed why we don't have a car on several occasions, but it's not really getting through. So
yeah. They're like, they're just like, oh, what's this? What's this? Oh, that's shiny. There's a nickel over there. That's shiny. Do you like nickels?
Yeah.
Hey,
Exactly.
And then like, I mean, kids just bounce between like, just saying the most insane off the wall, like, shit. It would just be like, I love cats. Oh, I love dogs. And then like, oh, this is my favorite show. And then like 10 seconds later, they look at you and they'll be like, Daddy, are the worms gonna eat my eyes when I die? And you're just like, the fuck? Where did that? And like, it doesn't.
Yeah,
have
they're
any
morbid.
context. It's not like how we would think about it, because to them, death is just like, that's like when the bad guy on the show gets arrested and he comes back the next week. That's death to like a little kid, and it's like, even if they can understand it's forever, it doesn't have the same weight to them.
Yeah.
And so they'll just like say like, oh, like, they're people live in the attic, and you're like,
oh God, no.
Do they? Do I like? And so it's one of those things where you're like, there's no way. There's no way. But then like the tiniest bit of you is like, but like, did she hear something scurrying up there? Maybe we have rats. I should go in the attic and look and see.
Okay, Nate, like
and you're just like, and I mean, obviously it's nothing. Like, she's just talking because that's her imagination. But it's just like, what the fuck?
Well, I don't know, because I went to go see The Exorcist in theaters on Monday, which strong recommend.
Original?
Yeah, the original. Yeah, I'm not playing around with this new shit.
The new shit looks terrible, and it's like weird. It's like, Daddy, I don't want to go to hell, and I'm like, I'm really affected by like little kids in movies. You can always work me up with that, and I'm just like, Jesus Christ, kid, shut the fuck up.
No one cares. Yeah,
and I mean, it's not their fault. It's not the actor's fault, but like, Jesus Christ, this is bad.
Yeah,
I don't want this. Yeah,
the original is such a cinematic masterpiece. I mean, not to like belabor a very obvious point, but I'd never seen it on a big screen before.
Yeah, I've definitely never seen it on the big screen.
It's gorgeous. Like, that's one of the things about it, is it's really, really beautiful. And, it stands up really well. We'll say that about it. I don't find it frightening. But I find it very interesting. And, so that was a lot of, but, we all know that if there are rats in the attic, then actually maybe your daughter is possessed. So.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what I learned, okay?
Yeah, that it's so good. Like the music, like the little piano jingle that plays out when he's looking in. You're just like, oh man, this is fantastic.
It's so good. A really great grappling of kind of like faith and Catholicism, and also I like how it portrays priests as like a bunch of guys with actual intellectual things going on for themselves as well. I think that's really cool.
Yeah. I think with like exorcism movies, like I mean, you could do a lot with priests anyway, but like I think they're really cool there because you can show them as like superheroes almost, like you know, they're just like, because they go in there and they're the only ones that can do it, you know. The atheist isn't going to be able to do it, the Protestant's not going to be able to do it. We got demons, we got to call the white collars.
Yeah, that's because demons speak Latin. So,
yep.
You know, if you...
None of the rest of us speak Latin. Only those people do. And it's like weird because like if you just speak Latin to them, you'd be like, you know, hey, let's leave. But since we don't know it, they're just like, oh, okay, we got to speak Latin. Cool.
Nerd demons.
Yeah.
That's really it, yeah.
The continued use of Latin as a liturgical language is a con by big Catholicism to prop up the exorcism industry. Yeah, we go.
Right.
Let's run with that conspiracy theory, baby. Woo!
Okay, I pay that. I pay that.
Yeah. This is all part of their plan. Big holy water's in on it too, as we all know. You just see me drawing like on the chalkboard behind me, like
with
we're
the
through the looking
vampire.
glass here, people.
They're in it with the reverse vampires for sure.
Obviously, the reverse vampires. Yeah. Yeah, man.
Yeah.
Kids are fucking wild.
I love it, dude.
Yeah, they're great. They just like, oh man, they're great. They are like taxing, tiring, annoying as hell. Like show you all the worst parts of yourself because they just like do the stuff that you do that's annoying or silly or whatever, and you're like, fuck, that is so annoying. Why do I do that? Oh man, yeah, kids. But yeah, they're great because you know, constant source of joy. You know, they tell you they love you even though they're like giant assholes to you, and your heart just melts. And then
they ask you about worms and eyeballs, so they keep you on your toes.
They ask you about worms and eyeballs. Thank you, children, for existing. If any of you are listening to this, please stop.
Yeah.
And go watch like some kid show. You don't need to be listening to this shit.
Yeah.
This is boring adult stuff. Yeah. Anyway, you want to talk about some boring adult stuff?
Woo! Yeah.
All right. 3, 2, 1. Hello, and welcome back to We're Not So Different, a podcast about how we've always been idiots. My name is Luke Waters, and I am an amateurish historian. And as always, I'm joined by Dr. Eleanor Yannicka, who is anything but. Hey, today we're finally doing a series about King Arthur and all that Arthurian bullshit. If you've been one of the people asking, here it is. It's finally time. But before we get there, we do wanted to start with a quick note about past guest of the show and friend of the show, Matt Chrisman. Of Chapo Trap House. A couple weeks back, Matt had a serious medical emergency, and he's in the ICU. He's still, or actually, I think he's out of it now, but he's been in the hospital the whole time. He's just, we don't know much. I don't know anything because I'm not like close friends with him or any of his people or anything. But we want to keep thoughts and prayers, if that's your sort of thing, up for Matt because he is one of the funniest and I think best minds on Marxism in the English speaking world, if not the whole world. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, and I was going to say, and fundamentally, he's a force for good. Same side as the podcast. Never been anything but kind and supportive to both Luke and I. And our thoughts are just really with him and Amber, especially, as they are just becoming a family. So,
Yeah, they had their first kid. who was born healthy, from what I've been told, which is great. They had her a few days after Matt went into the hospital. And so, yeah, it's been touch and go from them. But the guys on Chapo said on their episode from yesterday or the day before that he's doing a lot better. There's no timetable for a return or anything like that. But he is, he's awake and he's aware and, happy to hear all the good wishes and well wishes and everything like that. Yeah, so if you haven't, just good thoughts from Matt. Mm-hmm. And, yeah, hopefully he'll be back doing his thing soon, as soon as possible. But mostly just, hopefully he'll be back because, starting a family and, you want to, you start a family and, yeah. You need, you want both parents there. Yep. And so, yeah, that's cool. Yeah, we want that for them. So, yeah, get well soon, Matt. Best wishes to you and the family going forward. So, yeah, we're going to move on to our question now. And this comes from Aurora, and there's going to be a kind of short answer to this question. Aurora says, "Hello. I'm sure this is an unoriginal and maybe overlarge request." No, it's not. You're fine. But I've been drinking tonight, and I would like an overview of the Arthurian legends from you guys, please, and thank you. Well, Aurora, let me speak for Eleanor when I say, here you go. Enjoy the shows. And we've got we've got more questions about this from our patrons that we'll get to later. But yeah, that's the question for today. We're going to move on to the main show because we don't really need a lot of fanfare for it. But if you do want to ask questions like that, you know the deal. Patreon.com/WNSDpod, $5 a month. It's great. It helps the show, and you can give us episode ideas or, questions just like this. So, yeah, we've been doing this podcast for nearly 2 years now, and I can say with certainty that King Arthur and Arthuriana more broadly is our single most requested topic. It shows up on our replies on Twitter sometimes. It's been a persistent point of inquiry for our patrons, and I've even been asked about it by people who just learned about the show in real life. So we're finally giving in to your demands and doing the damn King Arthur series. I couldn't really tell you why we waited so long to do the series. We've referenced Arthurian Legend on the show a few dozen times, and we've covered modern retellings and adaptations of the stories like the Silmarillion and the Green Knight. We've discussed it internally a few times, but just never settled on it for whatever reason. Sometimes you just get sidetracked. 23 episodes on historical materialism here, 9 episodes about heresies and the Reformation there. It happens. But we're doing it now, and that's the important thing. Here's how we're going to do it. The episode will be largely introductory to the concept of Arthuriana broadly and how the canon of Arthurian legends was formed specifically. While there are many interesting characters and stories, which we will get to in the coming episodes, it is very important to define the scope of our series and also learn how the legend was passed down to how the legend that was passed down to us came into being in the first place. The Welsh weren't playing some sort of long game wherein they set out to write an entire interconnected series of fictional stories that they would then pass on to the English, French, and Scots to be greatly expanded upon and eventually canonized. They were telling stories about a king who they probably considered to have been a real ruler, or at least, a tall tale that was initially based on truth. But then how did we get from Welshmen spreading tall tales by word of mouth about a brave ruler from 2 towns over to a fully built-out canon of myth and lore that has its own literary cycle and has been featured in every form of media ever created? How does that happen in the age before the printing press and the era of instantaneous mass communication? Who were the guardians of this canon who began formalizing it, deciding which stories were canonical and which weren't? And why did the people after them just agree with these decisions? We're going to talk about all of that today as we start our series on King Arthur and the Arthurian Legends. Eleanor, before we get to the canon and all that stuff, just a little basic info about the Arthurian legend generally. So when we talk about Arthuriana or the legend, what do those terms mean to you, both as a medievalist and personally, if they do in fact have 2 different answers?
Yeah, so for me, it's so tangled up at this point because obviously I simply exist in the world like we all do. And so Arthuriana is really around, isn't it? You know, I too watched The Sword in the Stone as a child, which is probably the first kind of Arthuriana that I was ever exposed to. I don't know. My parents may have been reading it to me. It sounds like them. But, you know, and I suppose here's a kind of a useful way of kind of distinguishing between Arthuriana more broadly and Arthurian legend. So, like, you could say that The Sword in the Stone, the Disney movie, is Arthuriana because it deals with the subject of, you know, King Arthur or the Knights of the Round Table or what have you more broadly. Whereas if I was going to say Arthurian legend, I would probably mean more specifically that we're kind of talking about some kind of medieval text more broadly. Okay. And I would say that that is probably more linked to either specifically canon building or, you know, just, or one of kind of the offshoots, because there's a whole lot of it around the shop. But I suppose Arthuriana can really be anything. I mean, it could be like, I don't know that this exists, but I'm sure that it does. Like, it could be like weird Knights of the Round Table porn, which probably should exist. But I mean, like, I don't know, whatever.
If that doesn't exist, I'm seriously disappointed in people.
Pull together.
That just seems like, come on, guys, come on.
Honestly, I mean, it's like it's right there. You can do whole like cuckolding scenes and everything with Guinevere. Anyway, I'm just saying that would be Arthuriana, but it wouldn't be a legend, right? Because the legends are more broadly the themes that I suppose we see in the various cycles and stuff like that. And I mean, to me, kind of personally, it's just always been this really kind of an overriding interest, right? Like, who doesn't like this stuff, you know? I'm as, you know, well, I'm probably not as prone to liking. I probably like these things more, but, you know, I love a legend. You know, I like all these stories. Probably now, you know, I approach them with a little bit more of a critical mind, but, you know, I think that this is kind of one of the building blocks of how we understand literature in the global north more broadly, and certainly in the English-speaking world, I would say.
Yeah. So, like, what is your favorite, like, bit of Arthuriana? Like, story, movie, show, you know, whatever. Legend, whatever works.
So, I'm really into The Knight of the Cart, which we'll get to eventually, I'm sure. I am very partial to Sir Gawain and the Green Knight because it's so bonkers. Both the story in its original form and, of course, the Dev Patel classic, which we all know and love. I think that those are kind of like my biggest ones, although I like some of kind of the random Arthuriana ghost stories that pop up around the shop, like Guinevere getting warned by her mother not to be a hoe and things like that. This comes up as like ghost story things, so I really like that.
For me, like, I don't know, I don't know how well it holds up, and I know the actors themselves are not covering themselves in glory these days, but I watched Monty Python and the Holy Grail so fucking much as a kid.
Oh yeah.
Like, I just watched the shit out of that.
I don't even know why that just like that for some reason skipped my mind. I was thinking about it constantly while I was doing the show notes. I thought that was the funniest fucking thing that had ever happened when I was a kid.
I saw it like 3 or 4 years ago, and like I remember like thinking like, wow, this is really just still so funny. Like it just I mean, like, to me, that, you know, that's probably what it is. But, you know, like, I remember loving the fucking Sword in the Stone as a little kid.
Yeah.
Love that fucking movie. Give me Excalibur. Give me the goddamn sword.
All the stuff where they would like turn into different animals. I loved that.
Oh, yeah.
I always felt so bad for, like, the lady squirrel who fell in love with Merlin.
Oh, yeah.
I'm like, justice for the lady squirrel. But anyway.
Man, I haven't thought about the lady squirrel in a long time. Yeah. So, you know, we'll talk a little bit more about the historicity of Arthur next time when we introduce the characters. But let's just get this out of the way right here with a quick answer. Are these stories based even partially on a real person?
No. Sorry, everyone.
Cool. No, yeah, that you know,
like
I don't think it necessarily matters, but I do think it, you know, is something that, you know,
And like, okay, so I will say that there is some kind of academic debate about this back and forth, but that is like saying that there is some academic debate about climate change. There's some people who really want it to be true. And my academic opinion about those people is that they are just really wishing very hard for this to, and like, no shade, that would be cool, but no. Nah.
Yeah.
Nah.
Yeah.
That's it.
Nothing else right there. We'll talk a little bit more about it next time, maybe. But probably not a real guy. So for those, Eleanor, for those who might not be terribly familiar with, these stories outside just the name King Arthur, what are some of the famous stories and legends that are considered foundational parts of the Arthurian canon?
Yeah, so I've kind of tried to do a quick grouping, because there's tons of stuff to say here. So the first thing that we have really in writing is from the 6th century. It's about Arthur, surprise, and it's in a Welsh text called Y Gododdin. And they are elegies to various men from the supposed kingdom of Gogongin, and all of Gogongin's allies. We've got one manuscript that's kind of survived with this in it. 6th century is a very, very long time ago. And so here's when Arthur gets written down. Now, if I'm sure that our listeners will understand that if something has been written down and it survived to us from the 6th century, it must have been getting told all over the shop. This would be a strong oral tradition. These are stories that are absolutely kind of being told from person to person and place to place. The fact that we have one manuscript that managed to survive for 1,500 years is pretty good, especially given the quite violent subjugation of Wales and how many things kind of get attacked and burnt. So good going, right? Then you got the next kind of things that we sort of have records for are about the knight Bedivere, who he shows up in the 10th century in another Welsh text called Pagar Evi Poor Arthur. I think, I don't have Welsh, everybody. I'm so sorry to the noble Welsh language. It whips so hard, I can't do it justice. And he shows up to introduce some things that we all know, which is he's the guy who returns Excalibur to the Lady of the Lake.
Nice.
So the Lady of the Lake, Excalibur, these are things we know. Then we have Mordred kind of come about. This is from around 970 or so. He is recorded as Arthur's bastard son, who he has with Morgause. And he's definitely one of the Knights of the Round Table. And he kind of shows up in this document called the Annales Cambriae. So, kind of like a Welsh, the supposed chronicle. Then from the 11th century onward, you got our boy Gawain, who shows up. So he is in Cwch y Olwen. Great name. Again, Welsh, obviously. And then suddenly you start getting texts that are not just in Welsh, especially in the 12th century or so. So you have Constantine III of Britain, who shows up in 1136 in the Historia Regnum Britanniae, or, the history of the kings of Britain. He is named as Arthur's cousin. So this is kind of like starting to populate the world of kings and get some other things in. Then there's Eric in Aeneid, one of the earliest long-form poems. This is from around 1170. This is a fun one where basically Eric gets married to Aeneid and they're really in love, so he stops knighting. And then everyone is all like, Eric, you don't knight hard enough. And he's like, I'll show you. I'm going to go on a tour to be a knight. And there's like stuff where he's supposed to be guarding Guinevere where everyone else is out on a hunt. And then some knight called a Wider comes out of the woods with a dwarf and insults her. And then he's got to chase him down. There's finding a hawk, stuff like that. Then you got your Tristan. He shows up in the Roman de Tristan, which is written by the French writer Béraud. And, he's also got his own spin-off, Tristan and Iseult, which is incredibly popular. Things of this nature. Your Lancelot, Merlin, all the names that you would expect. They're all in there, but the ones that kind of show up first wouldn't necessarily be what we now would expect to be kind of the very foundational stones that it's built on. over time. And there's reasons for that we will get into, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So how did these obviously Welsh, at least in origin, Welsh stories become the quintessential British myth? So much so that the medieval literary tradition is sometimes known as the Matter of Britain. Yeah, just like how do you get there? Like to the point where Tolkien was like, the only myth we have is Arthur. The only myths we have are Arthur and Beowulf, and neither of them are actually
It's true.
English.
It's true. So basically, we get them because of varying histories. Mm-hmm. And this is where they kind of start out. So you get them in the Historia Britannorum, which is also from the 9th century. And they also show up in Geoffrey of Monmouth's work, the Historia Regnum Britanniae. There's the history of the British kings. And these are incredibly kind of important works that do a lot of the myth making for Britain writ large, and very important within these. So we're kind of talking about 9th century to the 11th century here. Is first the story of Brutus. So the foundational myth of Britain for them, and where they say that Britain gets the name, is that Brutus escapes after the Trojan Wars, comes to the Isle of Britain, defeats a race of giants who lives here, and then founds Britain, which is kind of named after Brutus, and then it goes forward from there. Right?
Yeah.
And this is a big deal for medieval people because they like these legends, right? You know, I'm always going on about this. They want to have a kind of classical way of explaining their importance in the world, and it allows people living on the island of Britain to say that there has been some kind of link to the mythical past, right?
Yeah.
Then you slap this Welsh stuff on top of it. And now you've got to understand from a medieval perspective, the way that they think about Arthuriana is it's kind of taking place in sort of the 5th and 6th centuries.
Yeah.
So it's kind of taking place right after, quote unquote, the fall of Rome. It's taking place. For them, this is long ago and far away stuff. This is like, you know, like us telling fairy tales now. Yeah. And there's a kind of thing about it coming from Wales being like, ooh, mystical. Eh? You like that? Yeah. Oh, yeah.
They're like, we're only separated by some big hills, but man, over those hills, magic.
It's magic, you know, and there is a kind of thing there where because the Welsh are Celtic speaking, and they're, a Celtic people, there is a sort of strong understanding of England having been colonized repeatedly by varying waves of other people. So there's this idea that the Welsh are kind of more able to lay claim to a sort of original kind of idea of whatever might have been here. So Arthur being Welsh within these circumstances, it's like, oh yeah, well, that proves that it's real because, Welsh people still do be Celtic. It's not like something that's been brought over from elsewhere. This isn't like Beowulf or what have you, right? So there's this kind of realness on that. And also, I think that one of the things that's quite nice for them is that this is a really nice setup. So they're saying, okay, this is foundational myth of England. This is, Britain more generally, sorry, not England. This is kind of what makes us who we are. This is historical. And then there isn't a whole lot more than that. So it's like, all right, have fun, right? This is a sandbox.
Yeah.
Right? It's like you've got some very vague parameters and you can just kind of go for it at this point of time. So it's really fertile ground to work with. And that is nice for British people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's very British, but, at the same time, kind of French, though, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Like the term, the Matter of Britain, is actually a French term. Let's get ready for Eleanor to butcher some French. Like métier de Britain is what it is en français, allegedly. And this is a quote that comes from a noted French guy, Jean Baudel, from the 12th century. And he writes about it in his Chanson du Sasne. And he says there are only 3 subject matters for any discerning man: that of France, that of Britain, and that of Great Rome. Okay.
There we go, baby.
Yeah.
There we go. Let's that just inward looking Western canon.
Woo!
You're like, oh, that shit came up in the 1900s. Absolutely fucking not.
Now, so let's have just to think about why your man Jean would have this opinion, though, right?
Yeah.
Let's understand that in the 12th century, who rules England?
The French.
The French, right?
Yeah.
And do you notice how he says that of Great Rome? So he's like,
Yeah.
I don't mean you, German people. You shut the fuck up. Definitely not the Holy Roman Empire. You're not real. No, you shut up. I'm fancy. You're not fancy. I'm fancy.
Oh, man. I do love how much people in the Middle Ages were sometimes just like, yeah, I don't give a shit about those fucking Germans.
I would
What are
like,
they doing over there?
you're rich.
Leave me alone.
You're richer than me and control a larger area of land. Well, how about I don't like your myths? Yeah, you burnt.
I don't have to pay a tariff to go between towns like you do, motherfucker.
Woo!
Good luck getting that stuff to Magdeburg, bitch. Yeah, anyway.
And like obviously, bigging up quote unquote Great Rome then also plays into these foundational myths. And
Right.
a lot of Arthuriana is composed in French. Like that's just a fact. A lot of it takes place in places that you and I would call France. Like a lot of it happens in like across the channel. Like a lot of it is like specifically Breton in character. There's lots of Normans running around the shop. So it's just this is French people being French. And then if you fast forward 700 years or so, English people are like, this is about me. And it's like, it's not.
This is totally.
Like,
this is a real story about my past. Like, okay, man.
Yeah, right. And it's like the lionization is specific to French people saying that they're the only guys that matter. Right.
Yeah.
So there you go. Yeah.
Yeah, so we have a question from one of our patrons, White Trash Historian, who says, I don't know if there's a limit to suggestions or a time frame between questions. There's not.
No.
Thank you for considering. But I'd love to hear either an episode or series on Arthuriana or just an explanation on why the English are so enamored with a canon that involves their king being cucked by a French knight.
Well, I mean, this kind of gets to the very heart of what the legends are about. Right. So in the first place, you've got to understand a lot of Arthuriana as taking place within the courtly love tradition. So, getting cucked is what it's all about. If you want to write, about hot, steamy love stories, they're going to involve cucking. I mean, come on. Like, that's just... You can't be in love and not cuck people.
I like the idea that you turn a story into your publisher in the 1100s and he's like, these two people just have sex? Nobody's even cucked? How the fuck am I going to sell this?
Yeah, like,
write it. Fix it now.
And the worry about the sexy French guy is, of course, eternal, I suppose. Yeah. But really at their heart, what Arthurian legends are doing is they are Christian allegories for understanding the world, right? So we're meant to kind of understand Camelot and the time of Arthur, way back when, as a purer time. This is return shit. It's like return with a V. Yeah. This is when knights were knights and, women were cucking, or whatever. And like things were as they should be. But it's all brought down because humans are also inherently sinful because we are Christian, right? And so to be alive in the world, even if you are in paradise and things are as good as they can be, is to experience temptation. And so the things that happen in the Arthurian legends are all about, sometimes people do like overcome and good things happen, but they're about failures. All right. And so the queen having it off with the sexiest dude at court, helps to bring about the fall of Camelot. And that's because, it's about the inherent lustfulness of man. Right. So all of these are Christian allegories. Fundamentally, it's about Christianity. And then I think modern people don't care about that because it's old and cool. So like there isn't a whole lot of looking into it. I don't think that people really do actually realize, if they're like, oh yeah, Guinevere and Lancelot, a lot of the times they don't make this is just an anecdotal observation, but people don't necessarily make that next jut to say, oh, wasn't Guinevere married to Arthur? Oh, they just go, oh yeah, well, I know about that, right? And that's about it, because a lot of people's exposure to Arthuriana is Monty Python and the Holy Grail, is the Sword in the Stone, and possibly the Green Knight, and like, no shade, but well, if you're not a loser who spends her whole life doing this, then why would you know? So
I didn't know, or I mean, I may have known, but I didn't, I guess, realize it until we started doing the show, and I'm like, wow, she's stepping out on Arthur a lot. Like, I didn't realize how often, the great English king of history and lore, or of lore, is, his wife was like, yeah, his dick don't work. I'm going out with this French guy over here.
Well, and it's not like, and also fundamentally as well, it's not, we got a lot of love stories about Arthur and like with other chicks. There's like the stuff with Morgana. There's like all of these other things. It's like, here's his bastard son, et cetera, et cetera. So, and we're kind of like, oh, ho hum, but there is this, so exactly, there is also kind of a tendency to focus on Guinevere and not Arthur. For said things, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah. So before we get to the canon, just the last thing. So how do the settings change over time? Typically when we think about it, there's Camelot, there's a round table, and maybe Avalon, So, where is the fictional round table located? Where was Camelot? And, where's the Isle of Avalon, et cetera?
Yeah, the answer is not really no. So Camelot shows up for the first time in the 12th century stuff. And that's in The Knight of the Cart. And basically they're like, yep, Camelot. They were all at Camelot.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, cool. So it doesn't get seen as the capital, like very specifically like home turf for Arthur until you get to the Lancelot Grail cycle a bit later, which we'll talk about more later. And before all of this, the kind of capital was called Caerleon, which is in Wales. In modern day, our word for the town now is Newport. Also, we know that Camelot is supposed to be down the river from a place called Astalot, which like becomes Shalott later, the Lady of Shalott and all that. That also does not exist. So, like similarly Avalon, like people talk, and there are these great, useful kind of changing places, because it's like, well, we know Camelot is near some fields and also a forest and also some hills. So it's like, it's this kind of magical moving place. But as we'll get to later, there are some attempts, especially later in the medieval period, to try to pin Camelot down. But for the most place, it's kind of a floating signifier of where one would have a round table, right?
Yeah. Like where would one have a round table?
Yeah, this place.
They're like,
right?
oh, it's a mystical place with trees and some fields and hills, and hey, there are sheep there. Oh, what do you know? It's the entire island. Oh, amazing.
Yeah, it's a very silly place, etc.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. That's what I've heard. Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about canons. I think this is, above anything else, the topic that has come up most on our Discord with regard to Arthurian legends, mostly because the idea that humans care deeply about the makeup of non-religious fictional canons is quite often seen as a totally modern conceit, a new part of our ever-shifting ideas about culture and media that only came about in the last, 200 years or so. I mean, surely our forebears who had actual manual labor to do weren't worried about something as silly as, whether Darth Vader or Yoda was a stronger Force user. Only modern humans are so myopically focused on silly pop cultural grievances, right? Right? Well, not so much. Turns out we've always been annoying about our little stories that we hold close to our hearts. It didn't even begin in the Middle Ages either, as the Epic of Gilgamesh is almost certainly an instance of a bunch of old stories being repurposed for a new heroic narrative, which is cool. We love Gilgamesh. Woo! I'm just saying. Indeed, the story of how the Arthurian canon was amalgamated and passed down to us seems downright modern in so many ways. Sure, there was no one at Arthuriana Corp sending cease and desist letters to you for infringement on their intellectual property, and there weren't online forum debates about it, but the rest of the stuff we associate with modern fictional canons of lore is there. Stories and plot elements evolving heavily over time based on changes in perception and cultural interest, check. Subsequent writers and storytellers creating what we would call fanfic, i.e. news stories based on secondary or even tertiary characters from the original tales, some of which are eventually incorporated into the broader canon, check. People gatekeeping the canon by compiling some of the assorted stories into a single, largely cohesive, somewhat homogenized narrative that considers some extant stories non-canonical and leaves them on the cutting room floor. You know that's a check. Whoa. Vehement disagreements over what constitutes part of the legend and characterization, check. The main character taking a backseat to newer stories and characters, check. The legends evolving from a loose collection of fanciful stories into a solidified, widely acknowledged canon containing standard characterizations, tropes, literary devices, settings, and story beats, check. You get the idea. All of those things happen to form the Arthurian Legends into a consistent canon in the Middle Ages. They happened without the help of computers or attorneys or big budget films or even unfinished epic fantasy sagas. But the real question is, how the hell did that happen? I don't know, but I bet Eleanor does. Eleanor, I've seen it, divided into like 3 stages in the Middle Ages of, before Geoffrey of Monmouth, then Geoffrey, and then the stuff after. So the early years, before Geoffrey of Monmouth put it in, kind of categorized a lot of it. When and where did these stories begin to circulate? And to the extent we can know, were they viewed as tall tales of real accounts at the time? Yeah,
so the pre-Galfradian works. So that's the fancy and highfalutin way of saying Geoffrey of Monmouth. Basically, like, what we know about this is that it's quite loose, right? And it's just kind of like Arthur was a guy. Oh man, he killed giants and monsters. He defended Wales from the Saxons. He goes into battle with the Saxons, kind of carrying Christian religious symbols. So like, like they are pagans. He is not. He's Christian. So he wades in there with a cross, or he wades in there with like a picture of the Virgin Mary. And it's like, here's this guy that was a very good Christian. And he existed, right? Like, there you go. Kills giant boars, kills dragons, stuff like that. So which is cool stuff, right? But it's kind of more a loose collection of like mythologized ideals that you would kind of say about any dude. If you were going to make a random story about an early medieval dude, like these are the things that you would kind of pull out, right? So it's not as complex until you kind of get to the post-Galfradian stuff, right? This is just kind of really emblematic, I think, again, of an oral culture where it's like tales you would tell around, a fire, and here's the mystical king who killed a dragon. Like very, very standard kind of there's a hero stuff, right? Yeah.
So, and then we got another question from one of our patrons. This is from Gaffsey, who says, I would be really interested in an episode on troubadours and the transmission of certain semi-legendary characters, e.g. Roland and Arthur, and how those evolved over time. I'm especially curious as to how written sources impacted oral tradition and vice versa. So, like, how do you get from, these people just kind of talking, maybe like making tall tales, and they like tell them a little bit crazier every time because it gets a bigger reaction, and then they get written down and stuff, and then people just start adding more and more. Is that just, something we don't really know a lot about? It's just kind of lost to the sands of time, or
I think that this is kind of tied more broadly to the development of life in medieval Europe. Right. So when you got the pre-Galfradian stuff, we don't have a ton of it written down, as I say, because it's a long, long time ago. Right.
Yeah.
Like the 8th century, 9th century. Woo, boy. So when we have things written down, that shows us that people were definitely talking about it, because the sources are likely to reflect something that was happening orally. Right. By the time you start getting into post-Galfradia things, and when you get to kind of peak Arthuriana, when it's just an explosion, you are in the 12th century, also known as the 12th century Renaissance. And what else is happening in the 12th century? You have a major uptick in quality of life. You've got the 3-field system popping off. You've got the heavy plow going for it. We are extending into ever greater parts of Europe, draining swamps in the lowlands. And the kind of upshot of these massive upticks in agricultural output is more time and resources that can be devoted to the arts. Right?
Yeah.
When things have been going good, then you get art. The troubadour traditions and the way that people compose lyric songs and compose stories more generally, and most of these are kind of like chansons, like you get a lot of songs, right? You get those because people have time to do that. They know they'll make a living at it, and they can go from place to place and be rewarded with enough money to live on. So they are probably composing their own versions of these things, and we do often have authors who are associated with them. But they are kind of symptomatic of a larger interest in Arthuriana widely, because this is something that people like, and so it's going to kind of get out there. So, as always, and granted, this is our answer to everything. It's a historical materialist show. Material conditions change enough that you can have art.
Yeah.
Right? And so that, and there is, of course, an innate human need to make art. That's why we have, cave paintings and stuff like that. And the ability to make art comes free with your humanity, but we get more art and it survives more better when living conditions are better for everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and I mean, this is like getting down into the particulars, but to me, it's very interesting because how does a set of, fictional spoken word stories begin to develop more broadly? Because even in the stuff that the little bit we've talked about right now, you could see that it starts out and there's Arthur and Merlin and Mordred is there. But then later, not only do they become characterized differently, but there are other characters added. There's Gawain and there's Tristan and there's, Guinevere and all, and all this stuff gets added over time. So were people actually just setting out to add new things to the legend, or was it just more like a telephone game run amok with, stories?
A little bit of both, I would say. So, I mean, there's probably plenty of things where they're just like, oh yeah, and here's how I can get it in. But I think more specifically, people are kind of doing fanfic. Right?
Yeah.
And there are some characters that they've already been introduced to. They understand some kind of very basic character elements to it. It's like, well, here's this person who comes from here. Well, okay, Mordred is Arthur's son. Oh, here's Arthur's cousin. Here's a basic kind of family tree. So you can kind of put that together into varying stories. And then, people are just like, I made a guy up.
Yeah,
I got a guy.
Yeah.
And then
I do love humanity's ability to just make up a fucking guy.
Yeah, they like to make up a guy, and sometimes they're like, oh, there's a guy from another story, and they're like, I'm gonna put that guy into the Arthur story. I'm doing crossover.
Yeah,
it's so
you got Batman and Wolverine fighting side by side.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's very, what is this, a crossover? And the answer is yeah. And the way things worked at the time is that then that becomes accepted, right? So, yeah, people are like, oh no, like I'm out to make a new story, and here you go, and here it is. And that's especially kind of like what the Lancelot stuff is.
Yeah.
In particular, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because I mean, like, when I think about it, it's like, if I see, like, a new character or something in, a show or movie I like or whatever, I'll be like, oh, that's pretty funny. And, like, I don't personally write fanfic, but, like, I could, like, be like, oh, man, I wish, this person would, like, or this character would do this because it would be funny or cool or whatever niche interest I have. And so it's like, people, I think, literally think like, okay, that is something only we do now, because you have like these like incorporated, extremely heavily enforced like ideas of like canon, like, because anybody can write, like, I always talk about Star Wars because it's my thing, but like anybody can write like go into AO3 and write a bit of Star Wars fanfic, but like the canon, quote unquote, of Star Wars is like, what what Disney and Lucasfilm Limited to to an extent say it is, and it's those stories, and anything outside of that is like, oh, cool, that's fun, like it's fanfic or something like that, or it's headcanon or whatever. But like, I just find it extremely interesting to see this like evolution more and more, and to see that people were like, yeah, no, Mordred is, his bastard son with this person, and Guinevere is sleeping around on him, and he's sleeping around on Guinevere, and there's French guys, and, and like all that stuff, like, nothing we have from like the 700s says that, these Welsh people were like, oh yeah, Arthur has a French knight in his service who, is sleeping around on him with Arthur's wife, like that, like they probably couldn't conceive of anything like that because it hadn't been,
it's not a literary conceit yet.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. It's not a literary conceit. And like, they don't even have the parameters for it because like, they are missing like 2 or 3 of those characters and a setting for it, and I find that extremely interesting. So like, at least that we know of, when did these start being written down?
Okay, like, so the first really big compilation, this is the Joffrey of Monmouth, Historia Regnum Britanniae. So this comes to us 1138. So this is, post Galfredian stuff. And the reason why we do pre and post Galfredian is because this is this is like the supercut. Right?
Yeah.
So it's like he not only kind of like combines all the sort of best anecdotes about Arthur that there are, but he makes up and establishes some of the most what we would consider to be the most important characters. So he gives the Merlin and Arthur myths, like basically kind of where they come from. He establishes their structure, like Merlin being like the son of a demon and a queen. That's him. That's my man.
Yeah.
Here, right? He invents Morgan Le Fay. Although for him, Morgan Le Fay isn't necessarily a bad person. Like sometimes she's either like completely ambivalent, or sometimes like she's a good person who helps out, and because Avalon is like, it's like her and a bunch of other chicks hanging out on Avalon, kind of doing nice things. This is the first one that names Mordred as the person who wounds Arthur. Geoffrey of Monmouth never says that Arthur dies. He just says that Mordred wounds him. And then, so this leads to all of the ideas that like he's underneath a hill and is going to come back someday. Right. He is the one who names Tintagel as Arthur's birthplace. I've been there. Hey, a couple times I've been to Tintagel.
Yeah.
And then he is also the one who comes up with Avalon. He's the one who comes up with Caliburn. So he like is responsible for a lot of like the very basic building blocks of what we would consider Arthuriana. Like, I mean, the idea of kind of like the Arthuriana without like the Merlin stories is like, what do you, and it's like, well, my man was just going for it, right? So that's cool, right?
Yeah, so like he's incorporating all this stuff, or I'm sorry, so like why is this considered so important? Just is it's just the first compilation of Arthurian legends that we have, and so it just kind of takes up an outsized place, or is it something more?
Well, it's kind of the first one that we have, and it also just expands the canon so widely. So there's just so much of it that everyone is like, oh, hot damn. Like this is a, like, oh, that motherfucker really kind of like, he did it. He made the supercut, right? So it's very convenient, I think, is one of the things about it. So it's, it does seem like it's the first kind of really big compendium that there ever is. And before that, you just had to be collecting it all single issue by single issue. No.
Yeah.
I want that.
Yeah, and then
special edition.
And now it's in a trade paperback. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, these stories were obviously going around. By the time Monmouth had written these things, they had been going around for at least 450 years. So there would have been a lot of stories of Arthur that were kind of left out. Or not referenced? Do we know why some of these stories were not incorporated? Or were they just like, was he just like, oh, I don't consider these canon, or I don't find them interesting, or, can we even know that?
Yeah, we don't really know, right? It's probably just didn't like them. Like him. It's like, I mean, this is like editorial conceit, right? He's just like, I think it flows better this way. So, there's, the Arthur going around killing boars. It's like, yeah, okay, fine. Like, whatever. Yeah. I think the questing beast still kind of makes it in there. We like the questing beast. But, there are all these kind of varying things that he just kind of thinks are boring, or they don't aid the flow of the story, probably. And I can't know why particularly, but it's just, didn't put it in. I mean, that's my best guess, but we can't really know. Right.
Yeah, that's awesome. It would be like if somebody found in 800 years, somebody found the remains of this, and they were they just picked up some, Tolkien fanfic that someone had written, and they were just like, yep, this is what Tolkien said. You're just here's the legendarium, and it's just some guy's insane fanfic, because you're because you're missing, you don't have the rest of the sources, so it's just yep, there's that guy, he's the one that compiled them, so that's what we're going with. And there's some some Welsh tome lost to time that they're just it's just no, all this stuff is cool, why do you leave out the boar, you asshole? I want my boar. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So I think you mentioned most of them, but what are the basic details that this does establish about the canon that we understand today? Yeah.
So it's basically Arthur exists. He's born at Tintagel. He, teams up with Merlin, rises through the ranks. He has this son. The son gets in a fight with him. That's how Camelot falls. Just the basics. It's the structure. What he really introduces is the structure of the Arthur myth. So it's it is kind of like an editorial process, is what I would say. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, and I know this is a point of contention in some academic circles, but was Geoffrey of Monmouth using real sources or making it up as he went along based on Arthurian legends he had heard?
Well, there is a very good quote from a 12th century guy, a William of Newburgh, about this. And he says that it is quite clear that everything this man wrote about Arthur and his successors, or indeed about his predecessors from Vortigern onwards, was made up, partly by himself and partly by others.
I love it. Just just juicy backbiting from the 1200s of people being either bitter or, bitter because they like different stories better, or just they didn't like, Monmouth that much. And he's just it's quite clear he's just making up all this shit as he goes along. Why is this guy important? Ugh.
Yeah. And it's 100% what this goes to show you is that even, 12th century people are this isn't real, these are stories, and that's fine. But I would say that what it tells us in terms of answering this question is a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B. He has certainly taken on work from other people about Arthur, but he's also inventing his own things. At least this is what William thinks. And he's going to be very catty about it. So nice.
Yeah. Love it. Yeah. So then there is the, I guess, post Gallifredian period, and that's when it becomes more about chivalric romance and knightly stories and all that. In the high and late Middle Ages. So like, when did these stories begin to spread out and become more than just about King Arthur himself? Was that definitively after Geoffrey and Monmouth's work, or before, or what are we looking at there?
Yeah, it's very much kind of like afterwards, but it's also kind of hard to say because it's like, so now you're here we are, welcome to the high medieval period, right? So they're like, we're here in the 12th century, and the 12th century is all like, can we get a cooking scene in there? Can we write about it?
That editor he's just hounding you about the cooking scene.
Where's the cooking, right? So here we are in the 12th century, and people want their cooking, right?
Yeah.
So that's so like, here you go, you've got a basis for a story, right? Mm-hmm. You've got like the building blocks, and so Geoffrey's provided you some really good building blocks, and people are like, too bad there was no cooking. Oh, I'm on it. Right. Yeah. And so they get down to it. Right. And that is just kind of a consequence of being in the 12th century. That's just how things are going to be. Mm-hmm. That's just, it do be like that then.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm just going to make up a rumor. Have you seen the meme about the hotel cuck chair?
Yeah.
Like every hotel's got, I'm going to make up that was King Arthur's throne. I'm just going to start doing like, originally that was King Arthur's throne, and see how many like weird people I can get to believe that.
I love that.
Yeah. So, I mean, like, if you had asked me before we started the show, like, what are the King Arthur stories about? I'd be like, chivalric romance or knightly romance or something like that. So how did it come to be associated primarily with those things? Is it just like the interest of people changed and they were like, look, we need more cucking stories. Nobody cares about the boar anymore. Get that shit out.
Yeah. Like, I mean, that's basically it. It's like, it's meeting the demands of the period.
Amazing. It's amazing. And I'm not kidding. Yeah. I do mean that is literally amazing. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's meeting the demands of the period. That's what the people want, so that's what they're going to give them. If you're a troubadour and you're going court to court or place to place or even, inn to inn, if you want to get paid, you need to give the people what they want, and the people want cucking. That's it.
Yeah,
Bang.
They don't want to. Yeah, the stories about the boars and Merlin, whatever kind of. Yeah, Merlin's there in the background. We might do an anthology thing about Merlin later, but right now people are just really about cucking.
Yeah,
and then at the same time they're also like, holy shit, the Holy Grail. So like, why did it become so focused on that specifically, like the Grail itself?
So these are, and we'll kind of get to the various cycles, but that's another one. And the Grail stories are a lot less about. So the cucking, it fulfills this popular desire to have stories about cucking, and you can also go, and lust is bad. That's what that means. But the Holy Grail cycle gets you to give a more kind of purely religious allegory about the downfall of man and man's sinful nature. So there are all kinds of things that you can work with depending on what it is you wish to write and who your projected audiences are going to be, because you're probably a lot more likely to get good donations from, say, the court of a bishop if you've got a story about the Holy Grail as opposed to the cucking stories, right?
Yeah.
And those guys still have money too, and they also like to hear songs, so there you go.
Yeah. Again, like, they're just like responding to the demands of the people, and I think that's really cool that, like, even like now it's like, what do the people want? Oh, let's go check the forums, or let's do some opinion polling or something. But like, it was like, well, that story didn't really pan out so well, so let me try this one about a hot lady getting fucked by this guy, and there's the Grail. Oh, we love religion, don't we, folks? So what news stories pop up in the post Gallifredian era?
Yeah, so you've kind of got, if we say pre, this is stuff like, Saxons, battles, then Gallifredian is like, there's Merlin, there's this, there's that. You also get like a couple things in there, like around this time about like, Arthur's got a dog, his name's Cabal.
Yes.
I love.
There we go, baby.
You've got, Arthur's son's Amor's tomb is here. And it's like, what? Okay.
Who?
Like, yeah, okay, I know, cool. Right? Yeah, cool. And like, these are kind of like introduced in like varying sections of the work that are kind of about geographical features, stuff like that.
Interesting.
And then you kind of get into, as a result of this, the various literary cycles.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And I think I've like kind of boiled them down, but there are a lot. There are a few different
There's a
ones.
few.
So
Yeah.
like what are the cycles here?
Okay, so I think these are the major ones, right? So you've got what we call the Camelot cycle, the quests, the Vulgate cycle, and the post-Vulgate cycle. I think those are the four major ones, right? So the Camelot cycle does what it says on the tin. It's like, oh, here's Camelot. This is what rich people should be like. Oh, but people are flawed. Lancelot, Arthur, and Gawain have flaws. And this eventually brings down Camelot, and it's the parable of the fate of Christian man. Like, Camelot, you read it as the Garden of Eden, right?
Yeah.
Quests, this is like boys' time. This time for the lads. This is the dudes rock hours. So you get the quest. So you've got your Galahad quest, your Percival quest, your Lancelot quest, right? So, and these are where you get all of those stories about the Knights of the Round Table, and the Knights of the Round Table kind of show up in the 12th century. However many members of the Round Table there are is in flux. So it's traditional to kind of say that like there's 12 of them, but by the 13th century, Layamon says there's up to 1,600.
Jesus Christ.
In the 14th century, King Edward III says there's 300, and he tried to like make his own Order of the Round Table and like model that. By the 15th century, when you get to to Arthur by Thomas Mallory, there's like 100. But the point is, so that there's a lot of dudes that you can make stories up about, and these are just kind of like that's your Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, right? So that's part of the quest cycle. The Vulgate cycle presents itself as chronological, and these are the things that focus on Lancelot and Guinevere. So that is that more specifically. Whereas the Grail, and then you get also the Grail cycle, right? And the Grail cycle comes in around the 13th century. So about 1230 to 1235 is where we get the Grail cycle more specifically. So that's the Vulgate cycle. Then you got the post-Vulgate cycle, which is usually written in Old French. And it's from the 13th century, and it's a rewriting of the Vulgate cycle that takes out a bunch of things, but then puts in a bunch of stuff about Tristan.
Yeah, Lancelot, whatever.
Yeah.
We got a new guy in here.
Yeah, because they're French, and they like Tristan, right? So they're like, get that shit out of here. We're gonna stuff some Tristan in, and that's how we're going to do it. So it's kind of like it is a take on the Vulgate cycle that, like, almost immediately after the Vulgate cycle comes out, as well. They're like, needs more Tristan.
I like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they got to Rostify Tristan up about 15% or so.
Yeah.
And then I guess the last big entry in at least the medieval canon of Arthurian legend, Thomas Mallory's Le Morte d'Arthur from 1485. How does it reset things, and how does it differ from Geoffrey of Monmouth's?
Yeah, reboot. That's what's up.
Yeah.
And so a couple kind of things are going on here. One is that Mallory wants a kind of quote unquote complete story.
Yeah.
So this is again like, so if Geoffrey of Monmouth is the first compendium, this is kind of like the last medieval compendium, right? He's like, no, we got to get it all together. But the other thing that he does, you got to understand the 15th century is a time of kind of like very nascent ideas about nationalism. Right? So he's like, and it was happening in England.
Yeah.
So like, this is the MF who's all like, Camelot was in Winchester. Things of this nature. He also really updates it. So this is kind of like the equivalent of, I don't know, 10 Things I Hate About You, right? It's like, it's like putting Shakespeare in the modern day. So you have like Arthur fight the Ottomans, right? Like you have all of these kind of current events that are introduced in order to kind of like bring it up to speed. It still really focuses mainly on Camelot, Guinevere and Lancelot. there are a couple things that he does, saying like, traditionally they say that Arthur's kingdom before this point is called Logres. I think it's French, but it's spelled Logres. But I think it's supposed to be Frenchified. And Mallory's like, nope, that's England. That's England. That means England. It means England. This is a story about England. That he writes also about kind of the blood feud between King Lot and King Pellinore. He writes a lot about the Grail. But so in the first place, he's kind of trying to say this is a story about England, but this is also taking place at a time when the English are very busy trying to subjugate Wales.
Yeah.
So one of the reasons, this is kind of like also a form of kind of cultural warfare.
Yeah.
I would argue. Where he's like, that guy's not fucking Welsh. Shut up. No, he's English. He's English. That's England. Yeah. This is about England. It was all happening in Winchester, and none of this has anything to do with Wales. You shut up. No. Right? So it's kind of like a way of establishing English dominance, so to speak, over British legends more generally. Right? Yeah. So trying to say that this is an English thing. So, in a way, it's kind of like handy, and in another way, like it's cultural genocide. So that's cool.
Yeah. Jesus. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Sorry.
No, you're absolutely right. And I mean, it's important to point that out that, like, in addition to like wanting to tell a story or something like that, it's also like, well, I don't like the Welsh. They suck.
Yeah.
They talk weird. I don't like their they're provincial weirdos who live behind hills. But like the thing to me that like really speaks out to me about all this is like how much this like mirrors the way that like canons are done today. Now, again, it doesn't have like the legal wrangling and it's not as much based on like business focus and stuff like that as it is now. But I mean, like, this is like the what we've laid out here for the Arthurian canon is essentially like the way Star Wars is run, like since its inception. It starts out with a story in 1977. People immediately begin to latch onto it. They start to add stuff to it. There's like a wider like group of canon that is brought out. The story evolves and changes, and like it gets away from being stuff about Luke so much, and now it's about Anakin or Obi-Wan or the new, or any of the characters from the old EU that older fans will probably remember. And then like, you get the reboot later, like when Disney purchased the Star Wars property, they did like a reboot of a lot of the canon, but it still kept the core parts of the old stuff. And it's just like, this is the same thing.
Yeah.
Like, this is exactly what they did. This is similar. This is also similar to like how George R. R. Martin has revised his own canon. Like, he's done it mostly internally, but like, how he did that, and how Christopher Tolkien had to like take on the work of his father after, his dad had written so much stuff and he was doing the Silmarillion. And I just like, I find it like, to me, I've talked about it before. I love lore. I love the way it's built and everything like that. But like, to me, it is so fascinating that this was happening from like, the 700s to, the 1500. It's just like a period of like canonical consolidation and formation around this story. And I mean, it took much longer because, things took much longer to circulate back then. But, they were still going for the same thing. There aren't... they don't. They get tired of Lancelot. They get tired of Luke Skywalker. They get they get tired of Ned Stark or whoever, and it's like, okay, now we're going to move on to like these new characters, and you get like fan favorites who people, like Tristan, who comes in, and people are like, I don't care about Luke and Leia anymore. Give me Tristan, give me Guinevere, give me Lancelot. I find that incredibly fascinating.
Well, I'll tell you what, mate. We're really not so different.
We aren't. It's true, we aren't. We harp on it, but man, this is just so funny to me because like we just like it's the same thing. It's the same. Like if I wrote a new story today and like it became popular and everything, this same like broader Arthurian canonical cycle would play out with my story over time as long as it remained popular. Or even if it didn't and then people picked it up later, it's like they might pick it up and be like, yeah, the original story wasn't that great, but what about this guy? What about, and it's like, yeah. And I find that, something where people are just like, yeah, I don't like that guy. I'm making up my own guy.
Yeah.
Fuck you.
That's what I love about the post-Vulgate, where they're like,
yeah,
no. And it happens fast too. It's like, no, I like Tristan.
They're like, I'm not going to do that.
No.
Oh man, yeah, I love it. Well, yeah, that's our first episode on King Arthur. Mostly about a little bit of broad stuff, and then the canon. Next time we'll be back, we'll talk about more about I guess Arthur from the early modern period into the present day. The influences and all that, and then we'll talk about characters and settings, and what we're gonna do with that stuff going forward, and how we're gonna tell the stories. So yeah, that's what we got coming up. Eleanor, what's going on with you?
I wrote a blog and everything today, so that'll be up later in the week, where I'm writing about the people who think that there is going to be a 5G virus that turns not necessarily everyone, but very many people with vaccines into zombies going off in America. So, R.I.P. Luke. Excited to do this podcast with you as a zombie. So I've written about that as a compare and contrast with medieval people and their understandings of germ theory. So look out for that later in the week. You can find me on Twitter and Blue Sky at Going Medieval. I'm posting more on Instagram now just because I'm, at least one thing a day. I don't know, man. Like, if I see something pretty, I put it up there. So, and I'm just Dr. Eleanor Yanaga there. So it's not very exciting. You can always buy my books, The Once and Future Sex, or The Middle Ages, A Graphic History, wherever good history books are sold. And if you want to check out my other podcast, that's Gone Medieval. There you go. That's my things for today.
Cool. Yeah. You can find me Twitter, Blue Sky. Luke is amazing. I don't really ever post on Instagram. I don't know. Maybe I should do that. Yeah.
Mine was personal, and like it got fucked up, and somehow regular people found it, and so now it's like not.
Yeah.
Yeah. There you go.
Yeah. Yeah. You can find me on those places. You can find my old show, People's History of the Old Republic, wherever you're listening to this right now. But that's going to do it for today. So yeah, thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.